How does the practice of contemplative prayer help us to move from the false self to the true self?
Getting baptized is a commitment to the death of the false self, a willingness to allow God to take away our faults, and at the same time, a willingness to open ourselves to the dark side of our personality and the obstacles that are hidden in the unconscious that prevent God from taking over our lives. And so the divine therapy then is a very profound healing process that deals not only with our conscious life, but with our unconscious wounds from early life that are the result of the desires for happiness circulating around those three energy centers of power and approval and security, being frustrated. So whenever these desires, especially if they're very strong, and they're usually especially strong in people who've been deprived of them, a reasonable amount of them in early childhood, they become overwhelming demands and needs, and so they're certain to be frustrated in daily life. And then as soon as they are frustrated, we don't get the applause or the approval or the security or the power that we wanted, then off go the afflictive emotions of humiliation, shame, anger, fear, discouragement, whatever is appropriate for one's particular psychological makeup and history. And so there's an explosion, in other words, when the unconscious motivation, which has an enormous amount of emotional investment, comes into conscious contact in daily life with events that frustrate it. And so life then becomes a series of conflicts and emotional binges, because as soon as a strong frustration occurs, the commentaries, the prepackaged commentaries go off, such as, how can they do this to me? I'm always supposed to be right, and now nobody accepts this. What will my relatives think? And all these things. And so that intensifies the level of the emotional distress. And so there's a continuity to all the emotions, like anxiety goes to fear and then to panic. And irritability or irritation goes, and annoyance goes to anger, and then to rage, and then to moments of insanity. And that's at that point that people will kill each other because the emotions take over. And so to recover from an emotional upset takes time. Physiologically, when anger goes off, or fear, adrenaline floods the body. So you're going to feel it for the next 2 or 3 hours, because chemically it takes that long for the body or the liver to get rid of this bilge. And so this is what I mean by saying the question, where are you, begins to reveal to us the depths of the misery and unmanageability that we're actually in. So we're dominated then, normally in everyday consciousness, by this situation where we're dominated by events and other people in our relationships and our reactions to them and the commentaries that make the reactions worse. And so the whole experience simply goes back into the unconscious and reinforces the pathology, unless you do something about it to let go of the basic issues that are at the source. In other words, sin is not really the problem in most cases. It's like the leaves of a tree. They will be healthy if you have a good root. They will be unhealthy or rotten, and the fruit will be rotten on the tree if you have an unhealthy root. That's why Jesus suggests change the roots of the tree, change the direction, the radical direction in which you're looking for happiness. That's what repentance really means. And it's a much more intimate and deep renunciation than simply to give up a meal or to do a little fasting or to give up a little sleep or give up a little money. These are just sort of starters to sort of shock the system into the fact that there's going to be some change. So you start out lightly, but soon, and this is what contemplative prayer does. It makes us vulnerable to the contents of the unconscious by a period in which we do not think about anything, even God or spiritual things, but simply open ourselves and give our whole being to God through our consent to the divine presence within. And that's what I mean by intention. Intention is simply consent to God's plan. And that plan consists of two things. One, accepting the divine presence within us, and number two, accepting the inspirations that God gives us that lead to health and to teaching us how to let go of the false self system with its consumption of valuable energy that, when they are laid to rest in some degree, becomes available for the spiritual journey and the difficulties that are essential part of that journey, not because this is God's will, but because of the place we're coming from. In other words, the medication has to fit the depth of the disease, and the therapy has to allow the undigested emotional material of frustration and trauma that has been repressed to come to consciousness. It's only in this way that the emotions can be dissipated. They basically are energy, but then that energy remains in the body as a kind of warehouse of our emotional damage, and it secretly then influences our rational decisions without our knowing the fact. So the contemplative prayer alerts you through self-knowledge to these programs, their influence, the intensity of the energy that is put into them,